Got my water. All good. So we can roll.
So welcome aboard, everybody. This is a particular pleasure for me because I'm with my old friend Leo. We met 25 years ago, I think it was. We were on the training course in Oxford together. There are a few additions to that. Leo went on and joined Britannia Airways, which is now Thomson Airways, straight after our training course. Going to tell us a little bit about that. And I joined, must have been 8 or 9 years later. So I actually flew as a first officer with Leo. Leo was the captain's, and I have what was a great learning experience, but also embarrassing, was the worst landing I've done in an aeroplane with Leo, my mate, who was the captain. And one of the most interesting points in terms of the simulator. I'm not going to say it as a failure, but we'll talk about that later. Really interesting. Anyway, welcome, Leo. Lovely to have you with us.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here. I think when you want to have a trip up or something that goes wrong, you want to do that with your mates. So I think that's always That's
very true. That's very true. You didn't send any communications into the company and say, sack this bloke immediately. So I owe you plenty of beers for that one.
No, not at all. I think that's one of the things about the fallibility of ourselves in aviation is how we do screw up all the time. And it's one of the themes that we could maybe touch on later is that there's the Airbus Across project where they're looking at single crew ops, which just fundamentally fails to understand how we work as teams.
I think you're right. That's going to be such a good discussion. So just give us a quick intro to what you're doing now and how you got to where you are now.
Well, I'm from Zimbabwe. I was born and bred out there. I had the pleasure of growing up in independent Zimbabwe until I was about 20, and then ended up pursuing, from an early age, actually, aviation and flying, with a great interest in just general aviation at that point. At the Mashonaland Flying Club, which was a fantastic organisation and a great group of enthusiastic people who literally kept the place going through sheer enthusiasm. And then quickly realised that to get a good international qualification was to come to the UK. And I was lucky enough to train down at Bournemouth, PPSC, all the upstanding, and subsequently at Oxford training in a modular flying route, which that flight training route at some point caused some interest to the recruiters, or lack of interest, depending on their point of view on modular flying and how people who were either self-improvers, as they call them, or modular students work through the process to become professional pilots. But as I say, ended up in Britannia Airways and haven't looked back. So it's been a busy and interesting 24 years. Just at Britannia. So it must be nearly 30 years that we first met down at Oxford.
It is, isn't it? I mean, that's 24 years. That's just extraordinary thinking about that. We were both young pups. I remember sitting. I thought about this. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about this. There's a brilliant story. It was slightly rude, so it's a joke.
Oh, yeah.
You told us. I remember that joke really well about the SME incident. I might get you to tell it later, but we were all sat round. You remember that time we were sat round?
Yeah.
I think the weather was bad. All of us little young pups, desperate to get our flying licenses, and we were all a bit frustrated. And then you started launching into this story. We think we were just sort of having a general chat, and all of us just fell on the floor absolutely laughing. It was one of those wonderful moments, came out of the blue. I don't know if you remember that moment. It was wonderful.
That was a hoot as we were building up our veranda flying hours, or the coffee room flying hours, isn't it? But I think actually we might touch on later is around establishing a good rapport and teamwork environment. Because so many people think that it's life as a competition to somehow be better than everyone else. When in actual fact, what you want to do is to, improve your team together and try to get through things, with the support of others. I think that's probably one of the big learning points in life as you transition out of school into, which is sometimes a sort of a bit of a solo challenge, into actual teamwork to get something done. Is really what appealed to me about aviation, because from whether you're dealing with the professional fuel guy whose job it is to make our fuel safe, to engineering, to handling, to cabin crew, all of our our daily work is in that teamwork space.
I think you're absolutely bang on. And actually, just to add to our listeners and viewers, that Leo is the chairman of the BALPA representatives for the company for Thomson. So you go into battle with the managers
in good faith. We are elected officials. It's a great honour to be elected into a position of some responsibility to take our pilots, agenda, if you like, to the management and sort of make it fit. And again, it's a bit like puzzle solving. How do we actually get the maximal improvement for the business and for the pilots to do that? And as a rider, I just say that anything that we've covered off today doesn't relate to anything that's ongoing at the moment, as you say. So I'm currently the chairman of that.
I would put you as absolutely my man to do that, because you are a great communicator, and we've always talked from at a quite deep level and understand the ideas of developing that good emotional and spiritual connection with each other, the importance of working as a team. You talked about it. We talked about it a while ago, didn't we? About trying to get into that flow state in the cockpit, which I think is a great metaphor for us generally, is trying to break down the barriers of communication, just get to that comfortable stage where we feel confident to really connect with the people in the cockpit, so that we can then just create safety, obviously, efficiency, and really to enjoy the whole process.
Absolutely. I mean, I think flow states are reasonably well understood in terms of professional athletes or specific endeavours that you're about. Perhaps it's playing piano or a musical instrument. When you're really in the zone, and that's a sort of an individual level of interaction with a musical instrument, whatever. But actually, when you're as a team, I think one of the big things is to as quickly as possible establish a great working relationship with people that you've never met before. And a lot of that comes back to, obviously, our standard procedures, normal procedures that we'd apply to pre-flight preps, etc. But actually, beyond that, I think it's about trying to establish that trust right from the outset. And you do notice that when crews are working on a particular challenge, it could be pre-flight or in-flight, that's the better their sort of teamwork that they've established and communication, that flow state becomes apparent, and actually much fewer errors are made in that when you're in that sort of frame of the operation. So I think that's an important part of aviation at the moment, which is perhaps not particularly well understood, but I think we'll get there as to some of the new innovations around not just flying at your good old V1 cut, exactly right. It's actually the teamwork to ensure that you've remembered to raise the gear, or if there are missions that the team are working extremely well together with elegant communication as quickly as possible.
It makes all the difference, really. I think if we just start from the basic premise, if we're not relaxed and communicating well with ourselves, this is the whole context of emotional understanding, is if we can't walk down that street and feel relaxed, then we don't have the capacity to think of anybody else or anything else, any element of nature or the environment other than ourselves. We're just locked into this kind of looking down at our feet, looking down at our phone, just not aware that somebody might need assistance on the other side of the road. And I think if we just take it back to that, because it's very easy just to particularly talk about an industry, and this is what have we got to do? We've got to train this out of the system. I remember one of the training guys at Britannia, Thomson, years ago said, we've got to train that out of the system, which I loved. But it all comes down to character in the first place. I mean, you're a strong, well-spoken individual. I always admired that of you in the early days, that you weren't afraid to stick your hand up. I remember when we all went for this day for potential jobs, and you were the one who put your hand up and asked quite a controversial question, and none of us got through. But I was huge admiration. I mean, where have you got the confidence to be able to stand up and say things? I mean, you're representing the whole of your pilot force against management, and it takes a huge level of emotional intelligence really to do that. I mean, where have you got all that from?
No, I think in some ways, I mean, as I say, it's not to be too twee about it, but good mates like yourself, people who are authentic characters, who likewise yourself had always you played straight down the middle. And I think, there was just no room for bullshit, really, swearing on the podcast, sorry.
That's fine. Go for it, whatever you want to say.
Is that, there's a sort of good level of authenticity, and the sort of bullshit factor is kept to a minimum. There's no pretense. And, that's where I think it's just super important to ensure that, there's that balance. There's nothing worse than not being exploited, because we all want to sort of have a job. But I think at the same time, that level of the fair play and having a fair contract, if you like, or whatever, with whoever you're participating with, and pilot training on the initial pilot training schools didn't have a great record. They probably still don't in terms of fair play. And I just remember the fact that when I was a child, growing up in independent Zimbabwe, which is a place that had a great deal of different people, different backgrounds, different economic groups, and what have you. I saw some fairly sort of difficult politics, in play, that started out with fairly harmless, corruption, if you like, that then migrated into full-scale state capture. And actually, one of the big things about that is when people who are in civic society or just the average person in the street is not prepared to stand up against that kind of corruption. So I think that not to get too emotional about it, but my parents were briefly incarcerated by none other than Robert Mugabe's wife, Sally Mugabe, and I saw that level of bullying by people of power in power to be not only wrong and distasteful, but to really gnaw away at the fundamentals of society, and then that just I guess stuck with me as a core driving force around what's fair and what's straight and what's reasonable. So I think that was quite a difficult spell, as a teenager, but actually sort of pushing through that and sort of saying, actually, there are lots of great people, the majority. You just got to watch out for a few of the bad actors.
I think that's a lovely thing to hear, because you're effectively painting the world in a very positive light. In other words, most people, I've always thought that of you. You always see the best in people. You see the creative opportunities in people, knowing that there are some real troubles. And I think that comes down to a very strong value system of seeing Einstein talked about it, that one of the biggest questions we have to ask ourselves is whether we see the universe as a beautiful place or a hostile place. I'm paraphrasing there. I think that really, for me, that's one of the tenets of developing confidence and a good mindset, is really deciding, actually, are we going out there with huge capacity to do something amazing, and then to be able to deal with something that the inevitable struggles, as I talk about it, the inevitable turbulence, thunderstorms, lightning strikes of fear, doubt, uncertainty, exposure that hit us all over the place. And if we still have that amazing view of the universe being a great thing, of humanity being a great thing, we can always keep a beautiful sunrise on the back end of it. And I've always thought that of you, because it's hard work. I know that the job that you do now is incredibly hard. Apart from your flying responsibilities, you go in and you have to negotiate, use that very high level of emotional understanding. I think it's valuable, but your value system is very strong. And I think it's very easy in our very claustrophobic environment, sitting in that cockpit, if somebody is underconfident, hasn't really worked out what their value system is about, they can be bullied very easily, or they can perhaps go on to exerting unfair, as you pointed out, unfair force on the other person, and that of course has a huge impact in terms of safety, but actually just enjoyment, really. I think if we can enjoy life, we have the capacity to do everything, like safety and efficiency. Yeah. I think that's where it comes from.
You're absolutely right, and I keep coming back to good mates, and we haven't spoken for a while, and when we do catch up, it's a bit like we haven't missed a beat, and I think that is a testament to the openness of the relationship. There's no pretense. And not saying you abandon ego or whatever. Ego has a very limited role. Much more so than people might think, and particularly in aviation, is that if you're going around as a bit of a an egomaniac, and I'm doing this for the terrible importance of myself or whatever I perceive to be the role is, that's just a disaster. I think it's really much more about that satisfaction of doing a job well and trying to actually sort of make a positive difference on stuff, which is not always, doesn't always land right, but that's the objective anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like the message. It doesn't always land right. You can come in on a flight in an airplane, you think you've done everything right, and then suddenly, wallop, you hit the ground hard. Exactly what I did. I'll tell that story quickly. We were coming into, it was Kos, I think, wasn't it? It was a night Kos. You're pretending you don't remember it, but it was very memorable because we came in, and I think you'd already said to me they don't have any don't have any runway lights down the middle, which gives us that great perspective for anybody that's not into aviation listening to this. You have lights on the side of the runway and at the front, and hopefully in the middle of the runway, and it gives you that nice little perspective to come in. And it's in a bit of a dark hole, no lights down the middle of the runway, and you just get that whole feeling of, I'm not sure where I am. So I came in thinking I'm going to hit the runway incredibly hard here. So I pulled up too early, right-hand seat, pulled up too early, and then you were like, oh, you flared too early, and then it was just a matter of counting the seconds before we absolutely thumped that aeroplane down. I mean, it was a proper bone shatterer. Fortunately, I think it was your fault. You were the captain, of course. It wasn't my fault. But I got away with it not being a heavy landing in terms of engineering studies and having the aeroplane grounded. But it was certainly embarrassing. And I remember getting on the PA and apologized to the people in the back of the aeroplane. And we got in the bus with the flight attendants. And I said to them again, listen, I'm really sorry, guys, I got that wrong. And they were like, phew. Yeah, sort of fiddling with their teeth and all that kind of stuff. But
I think in some ways it is interesting again about pilots, being self-critical and analysing whatever particular failure may have occurred on the day. And I think that to some extent there's obviously value in that to try and sort of re-establish a different understanding of what might work next time. But the truth is that that we actually, everyone else rolls on from that more quickly than sometimes the individual might realise. And in a way, when you've got very inexperienced people coming through training, is that you want them to be, to have that confidence and the self-analysis and what have you to get things right. But the fact that the recovery mode and that resilience is there, that when it doesn't work out, you chalk it up to experience. And certainly from a flying perspective, that there is no experimenting on the line. The actual operation is all about operational excellence, and there isn't any training as such. We're just flying the aircraft to the best of our ability. So I think that again, keep the experimentation to the simulator, and then just try and hone that perfection. And one thing that lots of great people have come up with it, say Malcolm Gladwell or whoever, that deliberate practice. So if you've got a particular plan on an approach, and your approach is this week, you're going to focus on speed control and accuracy of vertical speed, and that you have a target that I'd like to fly these approaches to plus minus 10 knots, and then the vertical speed within a specific tolerance, particularly at the late stages. And just staying on that as your deliberate elements of practice, and then that's what you pour into in the debrief to sort of get the value out of it. And as you have that deliberate practice with intention, with an intentional focus, it can give people a faster rate of learning, and become more confident, because you don't want to fail fast in flying. And we might fail in the sim, but failing in the live environment is a high consequence environment. And that's not what we're about. We're about, say, trying to be as excellent as possible, whilst maintaining good communication. It's a bit of a balance.
It's all intrinsic, isn't it? I think there's so many points there that the simulator is a massively valuable addition, and they become more and more sophisticated, and we can hone our skills in that. I think for me, that's always a great metaphor for life, is that we have to simulate real life scenarios, whatever we're doing. Are we doing some, meditating? Are we manifesting things in our own mind? Are we going through, talk about armchair flying? I was a lovely instructor, a trainer told me in the old days, just sit there in your armchair, close your eyes and pretend to flick those switches. And I've always tried to use that in my life generally, is just trying, okay, I'm going to go into this conversation, just imagine what this is going to happen and how would I deal with that? And it's, at the end of the day, real life is real life. So I smacked that aeroplane down on the runway, and I've had some pretty unpleasant experiences like we all do. So we can plan, we can bring all the elements together, have all the support. But at the end of the day, experience in life is massively valuable. Sometimes we get away with it, sometimes we don't. But generally, we have to accept, I think, that like you did, you didn't judge me. Yes, we are mates, but I smacked that aeroplane down and you kind of laughed. You laughed at me. You've done that sort of stuff. So have I. I've done that. I've been with plenty of other people who've done it. And you laugh and you just think, well, I know exactly how that feels. I'm not going to judge you for that. So I'm going to support you because I feel confident enough to grab the aeroplane at the last second, just recover whatever it is. So you go for it. And when you get that emotional feeling from something, that is the best way that you learn from everything. You can go into the books, read all that. The way we learn best is through emotion. So if we've been in a simulator and we've got it wrong, it can be embarrassing. You remember that embarrassing thing because you've got these people looking at you the whole time. It's very claustrophobic. Same in the aeroplane. And I think it's the trick really is to accept that getting things wrong is massively beneficial.
Yes.
As long as we don't get them catastrophically wrong in an aeroplane, but we are trained to such a high level, not only in our skills, but this is where we need to train really in terms of our character, the emotional understanding, which goes way back before we even start flying aeroplanes, of course, to our childhood. So
that's something that, I've always been impressed by your, so that openness to learning and personal development, which is like no one's the finished product. And, I've always been amazed how you've been incredibly dynamic in, the flying prior to, what was Britannia Airways and then into the subsequent, excellence in the field of business aviation. And I think that is, you've probably had a lot more of the challenge and growth mindset, or had to maintain that, to maintain that enthusiasm and what have you, particularly in circumstances where you're operating with people who might not share the same values or same professional outlook. But yeah, really important, I think, to, let's say, operational excellence on the line. Things do go wrong. That's why there's two or three of us in the flight deck, and you basically just try and maintain that operational excellence at the same time as being hopefully in the training environment, in the simulator, able to explore things a little bit more and improve your skills and be open to feedback, to learn and stuff like that, which I think is not rocket science, but the good, firm, symmetrical Boeing landing every now and again is a great level up.
I like the way you put it. Very subtle. Yeah, I think feedback, massive thing. And we as blokes, I talk about this a lot because of our egos. We've got to be the problem solvers. We've got to go out there. We've got to be in competition with each other, because intrinsically, 250,000 years ago, if we weren't striving to be the best, then we were the one that was going to be eaten first by the lion. So we've got to have that go out there and be the best thing. But that's part of our ancient brain understanding that to accept good constructive criticism, good feedback is essentially important. And I know there are still plenty of times when I'm thinking I'm trying to defend myself because of the shame of not being the best, not being the good enough. I know it's part of my intrinsic insight, but you've got to stop and just say, actually, this is going to be beneficial for you. It might be embarrassing in the short term. Simulators, aeroplanes, just highlight that. It's a big thing. It brings me to the conversation we're having a few weeks back about the captain. You were telling me an interesting story about the captain that you guys you couldn't pass because of the captain's focus on all the manuals. Do you remember that story, rather than the understanding of the confidence, communication? Tell us a little about that, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit of achieving a command, going through the command course is always a fairly significant challenge. And to be honest, there's an optimum level of experience that you get both flying flying the aircraft practically day to day, that you can bring that experience into a command course and, hopefully pass. But, there's a sort of subtle balance around the ability to know, all the procedures and to understand where things are in the manuals and so on. But actually the bigger piece is to actually the people problem, if you like, or the people getting them in the right place, working well with you, and ultimately looking to satisfy that objective of being efficient and safe, in the operation. So I think in some respects it's where by having that sort of ancient brain kind of idea where it's a personal struggle and you're out there trying to beat the odds, single-handed. Actually, it's really not the case. I mean, what we do is we are relying on our colleagues in the flight deck or air traffic control, external service providers, or our cabin crew team, and you work with them to try and have a maximally beneficial experience such that the flight's as efficient and as safe as possible. And I think that sometimes that starts in certain respects prior to even roster publication, obviously your own mindset. But when you get the roster out, you see where you're going, hopefully you see who you're operating with, and occasionally if things are very challenging, like you're going to Keflavik in winter or the Nordic region again to undertake some challenging operations, I'd always have reached out ahead of time to try and get in touch with who I'm operating with, the cabin crew and the first officer, and just sort of say, this is the plan, and the weather's looking a little bit tricky. We might want to have a look at these resources, and then forearm yourself in that way. So I guess preparation and teamwork, then you're going to probably hopefully achieve a better output on the day.
I think that's the whole point, is that understanding. Again, this is what I talk about, spiritual connection. So my idea is emotional connection is really understanding from ourselves what's going on when we're in times of stress with the cortisol, the adrenaline, norepinephrine, and all the other bits and pieces, and the dopamines when we are rewarded, and there's so many things that I love to talk about. That's what I talk about: emotional understanding, emotional development of ourselves, and then we can start to connect spiritually to other people. People may think that the word spiritual is, I don't really understand that, but it's actually all about connecting with people around you. And it's so important in our business, isn't it? I talk about this a lot, that they reckon it's 1,000 people. I'm sure that's just been plucked out of the air that are invested to make one flight mission successful, and it's an extraordinary number. Mm-hmm. And understanding that when we're going back to that captain's, the captain, when you were trying to get the captain through the command procedure, the over reliance on knowing, I found that, and we know all the manuals and know all the theory, but at the end of the day, what do you feel like? So I've flown with people who are confident, underconfident. I always find the ones who refer always to the manuals are the least confident individuals. They're using it as a protective system. Yeah. Sometimes you've got to go back and just say, okay, where are we? Almost close eyes and just, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in the aeroplane and everything's going wrong and the cockpit's full of smoke, you can't go to a manual. You can't remember everything. You've got to think, right, close my eyes. What does it feel like with my hands on the controls there? What am I hearing? What am I sensing from the people next to us? And just, you bring all those different elements in. I got through my command course, obviously on the private jets, and I really wanted to prove how much I knew in the early days. Now I know, just forget loads of stuff, because talk to the person who's least experienced here. They probably know much more about the manuals because they've had to do the study, but then we can work together as a team, understand that we don't need to know everything about everything. We just have to rely on each other. Otherwise you just become massively overwhelmed with too much information. I just wonder whether that captain that didn't pass the grade there just thought, I've got to concentrate on knowing everything, but without actually feeling the important part of connecting with other people.
I think that's so true, and it's not just to say, it's not just an individual. I mean, there's obviously lots of individuals who've been around the track and not every training exercise or endeavour is successful, and that, as you touched on earlier, is the experience that you get when things don't work out. But at the same time, we want to do well, So having that optimum level of knowing where things are in the manual, just being professional, having a good level of understanding of procedures, that's all important. And I think then it's the people challenge that sort of the next one is to be establishing that teamwork as rapidly as possible to improve the communication flow state so that you're operating at the best level as quickly as possible. Because if you think about it, in certain circumstances, you can be called out at sort of 3:30 in the morning to get to the aircraft, in an hour and a half, and you're then off to somewhere where you hadn't anticipated, working with people that you perhaps haven't known. And in that situation, that sort of for sure, standard procedures is one big part of it, but the second part of it is being aware of the overall environment, how people are, and actually, leaning on your experience of trying to sometimes get people to where they need to be. So that if they're being a bit, they're operating a slightly low ebb, maybe just because of the time of the morning they've been pulled out similarly. Then you can get up to speed, and there is a point when you're on a flight like one of the Cat C flights, which is to an alpine destination in the winter, which are very challenging technically. That actually you'll go late from your departure point because you cannot launch for that with a short flight time of say an hour, which are also high workload. To have the team not in the right place, either the aircraft you're not 100% happy with, or at least happy with the current status of the aircraft and your crew and their working relationship and their knowledge of what, as you say, that particular flight mission to get the job done safely, and will go late, and occasionally there are some there's pushback on why that's happening or why are you going late, but actually it's because we're putting the interests of the team first and making sure that we're all in a great place before we launch off, and that can be difficult. We have to be super resilient to what's known as commercial pressure, which is probably as high as it's ever been out there in aviation at the moment.
Yeah, there's so many stories, and we could be highlighting those both from my point of view with ultra wealthy VIPs pushing us. The same with you, commercial pressures from a company that one bad move can bring an airline down. It's massive, and I think it's a discussion we'll have on another podcast, I think. But just thinking about our own personal stories, which I think are very beneficial at the end of the day. I mean, there's been plenty of times I've felt underconfident. There's plenty of times I've felt confident. What do you give us an idea of a time when you had your confidence and your mindset was in a low point, and what you do to get yourself back in the groove, as it were?
Well, I've never let a lack of talent stand in the way. So the truth is, I've been, whether it's been addressing the TUC Trade Unions Congress or public speaking, I was always slightly anxious about that. Particularly in the early days, to the point of where you'd run out of breath. Your breath work wasn't right in place, and then the adrenaline was up, and you had to sort of get the monkey back in the cage, so to speak. I remember sort of totally like almost falling over in front of a group of new recruits, funnily enough, who are one of the most enthusiastic audiences you're likely to find. But in that situation, it's I think everyone has their challenges to overcome in their personal sort of their personal comfort. But I do think that there's tremendous value, as many have said, is challenging your own comfort zone and not being hamstrung by the opinions of others. There's 101 ways to do it badly, but to some extent, go out and just try your best at either presenting or training or operating an aircraft, and just keep that sort of personal development going, which I think is quite a. It can be a bit exhausting, but I mean you've been there with that's what I love about this podcast and your mindset, is that it's about no one being a finished product. That we've all got challenges to overcome and get through them by ideally with your mates and ideally just trying to get the best outcome. But it doesn't have to be perfection. It's not an exercise. It's not all about perfection. Nice when it happens occasionally, but very rare.
Yeah, well, I'm still searching for that. Well, actually, I'm not really, because I think I have this thing that if I become perfect, which is impossible, I'd be an incredibly boring person. I'd have no friends whatsoever. So, because our idiosyncrasies are the things that make us interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've always done a little bit of. We talked about our personal development thing. We were talking a little bit earlier about exercise being a great way first thing in the morning, and having a cold shower and doing some breath work. And I think you're right, because apparently, if you go back to it's interesting, isn't it? Because you have gone, and perhaps I've gone beyond the idea of really trying to prove to be a pilot and a captain. We're going to the next level. You've gone to the representing the union. I'm going down this personal development program, the coaching and podcasts. But we are now finding new challenges. So 15, 20 years ago, to get up to a captain and was a serious focus. It was like, oh my gosh, am I going to make this? And everybody else is probably slightly better, and oh God, what happens if I fail? I'm going to be stuck. And now we've gone beyond that. I think it just proves that we've got to go through those difficult, challenging stages, and we are doing that now. Public speaking, they say, is the number one fear in the world, even more than death. It's extraordinary. But then again, our ancient brain is telling us, well, you're going to be shamed, people are going to laugh at you, and that's going to be the end of your world. But it's nonsense, isn't it? At the end of the day, have we got a good message to broadcast? And I think that's the point for me, is you appreciate that you have some value to offer, and it's not from an ego based. You understand that you have a connection to something much bigger than yourself, and you want to represent the majority in the biggest way you can, have the biggest impact, despite the turbulence that's going to come your way. And I know that certainly in my world of flying in the private area here, I've come across people who are underconfident, and I am developing my confidence all the time. They don't like that, of course, because I end up shining. If you're confident, you often end up shining the torch into someone else's tortured soul, and it can result in some seriously unpleasant reactions. And I really admire you and see you as an inspiration, the fact that you're prepared to stand up against these really powerful individuals because of that value system. And I think realizing we're part of something much bigger than ourselves is really, really significant.
Yeah, no, totally. I think we all have our own sort of challenge, and I think it's not shying away from the challenge. I think that's one of the big things, and you've done that in business aviation through excellence and flying the latest and greatest equipment, which is you're just having to keep on the front foot in quite small organisations. I think one of the challenges that we have is that we've got a large number of pilots. So in BALPA, there's 10,000, say nationally, is trying to actually make sure that we're all on the same sort of wavelength, and that the relevance is super high. That actually what we're doing is super relevant to the members and to pilots. To that end, it does come back to some sort of core principles, but honesty and transparency and being straightforward is a big part of it. Pilots have a super finely tuned bullshit detector, which is probably their one greatest superpower, which is great, because you don't survive long on the pitch if you're a bullshitter. I think in the flight deck or in any other part of the challenge that we do. But yeah, I think that overall, that you're referring to around that personal development and journey, just challenging yourself is a big part of it, and you're not always going to get it right. I remember on my command course, which I happened to take quite young, just by virtue of the circumstances, the luck of the draw, was very challenging. We were in Germany actually doing the command training with a sister airline, and there was some really difficult cultural and operational challenges to overcome. And I remember on a couple of times just being close to weeping at the flight control room. Again, you just had to realise that a lot of our mates and colleagues were having a similar sort of challenge, and we were kind of all in that together. Albeit that as a captain can feel incredibly isolated, because ultimately the buck stops with you, and there are often in difficult circumstances, you're having to rely on your own judgment, your own skill set to get the job done, which is can be lonely. But.
True. I think that's such an important thing, particularly again for us blokes. That we're strong and we can achieve everything, and we're not going to complain about the fact that we're not, we don't have emotions and all that sort of stuff, which was very much the case for hundreds of thousands of years. It's a very different thing now. But for you to actually admit that you felt like weeping, I just think it's a natural feeling, isn't it? You feel as though things are going wrong. You feel again isolated. You feel perhaps inadequate. There's a shame factor there. There's a guilt factor there. But actually understanding that everybody feels like that is so massively important, and not being embarrassed or full of shame not to go and talk to somebody. You're talking about that on the internet in front of potentially billions of people. And I think this is the message we need to broadcast out there. You're at a very high level in your industry. I've got to a decent level in my side of the aviation industry. And if we can get people to the feedback within themselves, just to say, listen, I'm a human being, so I felt like crying on that situation. And there's many men would be going like, oh, I'm not sure. But then men, just to put a fine, not to put a finer downer note on it, 69% of men 69% of people who end up taking their own lives are men. We know from that poor guy who flew the Air Berlin aeroplane into the mountains there. If he had someone there to talk to, like we do as with each other, it's massively important. Connecting to people around, admitting we've got some emotional issues, and connecting with other people around, I think, is the key to survival as well as thrival.
Well, as early as possible as well. I think we're in a peculiar part of our human journey at the moment, and the fact that social media portrays a lot of excellence, and you've got the really negative elements, say the Andrew Tate kind of style, where it's all about sort of some level of machismo. I mean, the truth is that in that I do recognise the fact that you do have to be competent and try and achieve a good standard. It's not to say that that's not the objective, and not all sort of navel gazing, but at the same time, when you look at particularly female pilot space, where online there's quite a number of images of perfection amongst the Instagram, photos, and dare I say, in pilots who are men as well, who basically got these Instagram feeds where everything is super glossy looking, and this sort of operational excellence and excellence in everything. Where they very rarely take pictures down the back of the bin shed, behind Heathrow Terminal 4 at sort of 4 in the morning. It's that superficial element to sort of say, these are the good parts, but actually in some ways makes it less accessible. It's sort of almost like, oh, I'll never reach that standard. Look at them, they're beautiful. They've got this incredible hair. They've got an amazing job. They look, every picture and image is coiffured as the sort of product, which is just the biggest load of garbage ever. I mean, it couldn't be further from the more gritty and more rewarding emotional side of it, which is that in the work that we do at British Airline Pilots Association, members, the familiar riposte is that a member thinks about quitting a couple of times a year. I'm thinking about quitting every week. It's the fact that the good stuff takes longer to extract and develop, and the bad events are slightly more immediate. So I do think there's that sort of odd crossover at the moment where a lot of the content on the internet is about everything just looking pristine and perfect, and in actual fact it's just so far from the truth.
I completely agree. We've talked about this before. I taught this with everybody. There's no point in putting up a glossy image and having nothing inside. Classic thing, a beautiful aeroplane. I fly a Gulfstream, one of the most iconic things in the world. I did a video on it 6 months ago, I think, for my YouTube channel. Just said, well, I want to turn up there and see it shiny and looking brilliant. But if I get into it and think, well, nobody's bothered to maintain or put some fuel in it, and I race off down the runway, and then suddenly two meters off the ground, everything starts to break off it, I'm in big trouble. And I think that's the same. You go on Instagram, everything's perfect. But let's go from the inside out. Let's not go from the outside and forget about the inside. It's the whole spiritual thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I do think you're just on that point is, you've got to be super, the authenticity of the whole thing, and pretense hopefully, is not a material part of what you do.
Yeah, I think that's the point. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be honest. It's got to be open. We have to avoid the whole thing about shame and embarrassment. That's the target for me. Listen, mate, we've got so much more to discuss here, haven't we? I'm just going to ask you one question, which I'm trying to make a bit of a standard thing. Is so what would the almost 50-year-old Leo, slightly younger than me, say to the young 20-odd pilot that was struggling a little bit? What would you?
I think probably that things have a habit of working out. So if you're making a deliberate effort and you're trying to be as precise as you can be, things will work out. And it is kind of surprising that, as I said, when you're of school age, it does feel like it's kind of you against everyone else, and I've got to get the A stars or this and that. And if you've got the ability to do that, by all means. But actually, the truth is that life is so much more of an interesting experience, and that if you just have your plan, chip away at it, it does work out. You would have thought that myself, who was a fairly disorganized 18-year-old flying at Shonland Flying Club, would end up only, well, it's probably about 10 years later as a training captain at Britannia Airways, on a 737 new generation aircraft. One of you was just a great experience. Flying with people like you, the whole journey was really a great experience. I think that's try and lean into that experience.
I think that's it. It's experience, and just having, you mentioned it earlier, grit, resilience, and keep going, because there's always going to be the bangs, there's always going to be the knocks, there's always going to be the uncomfortable ones. Brilliant stuff, mate. Thank you very much. And you will be back. And the other thing I just wanted to add is that Leo is in a unique position because his lovely wife, Nikki, is also a pilot.
True. So
Nikki's going to be coming on the podcast soon. And then I'm going to have the both of you on together. And hopefully your marriage will survive a podcast.
Exactly. She's on the A fleet, the Airbus fleet, the A fleet. I'm on the B fleet, so I know my place.
Well, that's going to be another lovely conversation. All right, mate. Well, talk to you soon.
Great.
Thanks again.
Cheers.
Cheers, buddy.
Bye.